country for the United States. They've done it before in Nicaragua, in the Contra War. They've done it even prior to that in backing Pinochet in Chile. So why not try and create an ultra-right-wing regime in Venezuela, get your companies to take the oil, neoliberalize the country, and that is what is known as order and stability. What the Bolivarians did in South America, which annoyed the United States a great deal and angered them, was to create an alternative. Economically, left social democracy, politically anti-imperialist, and the aid given by Chavez when he was alive to the Bolivians, to the Ecuadorians, to others who were in need of it, was quite astonishing. Acts of true internationalism, saying we can work together, we can create something different. Alas, it was not to be. His own tragic death created a crisis, which we see is still going on in many ways. And then the United States were proactive during the Chavez years. We live in a world where history, especially in the media and television networks, is totally ignored. But let's not forget the 3 attempts made to get rid of Hugo Chavez, who was elected with huge majorities. A coup organized by the army, defeated by rank-and-file soldiers, and huge mass mobilizations in Venezuela. The poor came out to defend the government, defeated that coup. And the most symbolic event of that 2 weeks was when the general came out to order the band to play the national anthem. A 16-year-old peasant lad from an ultra-poor family refused to play the trumpet. Some of you will remember that, and the general said, "I'm ordering you to play the trumpet." He said it 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the trumpeter said, "General, you seem very keen that someone should play the trumpet. Here, have a go yourself." That was the spirit of resistance in Venezuela at that time. And it was impossible to carry the coup through. And Chavez came back, again won elections after that, but they didn't try anything too serious on having failed this time and through other means that they used. Maduro came to power at a time when the economic situation was difficult. And look, for those of us in real solidarity, meaningful solidarity with the Venezuelans at this time and their elected government, we have to acknowledge to ourselves, mistakes were made. Mistakes were made on the economy, which are now recognized by most people. But that is not the reason Maduro is being toppled by the United States, because he made mistakes in the economy. Even though Maduro's vote is on a par with the votes received by Macron and many other European leaders in Europe today, they are on a par with that. But what we do know is that the economic crisis in Venezuela undoubtedly played its part in destabilizing the regime, and this economic crisis, which possibly the regime could have been managed had the United States not imposed sanctions. And that is the other mechanism that is used against governments they don't like. Impose sanctions. You don't like Putin, impose sanctions on Russia. You don't like the regime in Iran, impose sanctions. So here you have the global economic order totally under the control of global institutions that themselves are determined, their cadres, their personnel are determined, nominated by the United States of America. Not a single major figure from the Democrats in the United States has attacked what was done to Chavez, because they had been trying to do it before. And before them, Bush And before him, God knows who else. It's something that's been going on for years. The only thing that changes is the method. So from here, what we do is what we are doing. We tell the truth. We fight back. We support organizations like Venezuela Solidarity. And we use the social networks as best we can to spread the truth. Because that is the one thing we will never get unless there's a change, a meaningful radical change, which we might get with a new Labour government. So let's hope, friends, because one act of solidarity that we could do concretely in this country is, of course, elect Jeremy Corbyn and send him to Downing Street.
Now, it's fashionable, I hear, when you get on a platform to appoint yourself without a mandate to high office, even to be a president. So I thought I'd appoint myself as an official returning officer of a number of international elections. So here's the results. The first figure I'll give you is for the percentage of votes cast. The second figure is the percentage of the registered votes. So Donald Trump, 46% and 27%. Theresa May, 42.3% and 29%. Sanchez in Spain, 22.6% and 15%. Macron in France, 24% and 11.69%. Nicolas Maduro, 67.84% and 31.7%. And a late result has just come in. Juan Guaido, 0% and 0%. Maduro was elected through one of the most advanced and closely observed electoral processes in the world. The British Foreign Secretary said he thought there'd been tampering with ballot papers in Venezuela, which is really interesting because they don't use them. It's a fully automated, fingerprint-based system, audited publicly on the National Election Council's TV station before, during, and after the voting. And the electoral process was observed by 150 people, including 14 electoral commissions from 8 countries and 2 technical commissions, 18 journalists and many others, and no complaints were received. Maduro got 6.3 million votes. The nearest of his other 4 rivals, Henri Falcon, got 1.9 million. Maduro is the legitimate, democratically elected president of Venezuela.
Venezuela has always been the prize for the US establishment. Venezuela, a cornerstone of the alliance of those Latin American countries that are attempting to unshackle themselves from US domination. Quite a simple quest, but one fraught with danger. It's Venezuela that gave a lesson to other countries in Latin America on how you could challenge the power of the ruling elites in their own countries. Now, we now find that Venezuela is in the crosshairs of the US empire and Donald Trump. And how should we react? And I want to really say this in a conversational sense, because I'm having debates and discussions with people who I thought would be automatically with us. And if we're honest, it's really, really difficult at the moment, and we shouldn't underestimate that. Venezuela is not perfect. Mistakes have been made, and honest criticisms by friends of the Bolivarian Revolution are absolutely legitimate in private, not in public. Okay? I lived through the miners' strike of 84, 85, and I remember people bleating to me, the miners should have had a ballot in Nottinghamshire. Well, when the struggle comes, you make a choice. It's one side or the other. And we made that choice then. But some of us are old enough to remember Chile 1973. And we remember the phrases the Americans used then, that they would make the Chilean economy squeal in their efforts to overthrow the left in Chile. I remember the murder of people like us in this room, okay? That's a chilling fact. That's what's going to happen in Venezuela. And I remember political refugees coming to my city. And I remember the boost of neoliberalism around the world. And I'll leave you with two comments if you have any doubts about the situation. First of all, John Bolton, that historic walrus that strides across the TV screens. On Fox Business News, January the 28th, we are in conversations with major American companies right now. It would make a difference if we could have American companies produce the oil in Venezuela. It would be good for Venezuela and the USA. The second piece of information, the poll that we've referred to. 86% of Venezuelan people oppose military intervention. 81% are against US sanctions. Our demand is quite simple. The fate of Venezuela should be decided by the Venezuelan people, not Donald Trump. My final comment, because I know this is a difficult situation, is this. Remember the words of Martin Luther King. At the end of the day, it's not the words of our enemies we remember, it's the silence of our friends. We cannot afford to be silent, comrades. Thank you.
No war on Venezuela.
No war on Venezuela.
Thank you.
Hi there, how are you? Welcome to your healthy news from TeleSUR. I'm pleased to join you again. I'm Gerani Flores, and we are ready to provide you with information for your integral well-being. In this issue of Guide Your Body, we will tell about the multiple functions of the intestine, an organ which scientists are beginning to identify as our second brain. But before we delve into this topic, join us to check the health news of the week.
The United Nations Organization has called upon the Dominican Republic authorities to document demanding the cessation of the deportation of Haitian women in pregnancy status. Those women who have been forced to migrate to other countries due to the crisis in their native country and currently requiring medical attention. In this regard, the United Nations has indicated that it supports the request for assistance from the government of the Dominican Republic, so that increased immigrants will have a lesser impact on the economic stability of the country. Deportations of pregnant women are breach of the law. Breastfeeding elderly and sick people should not be deported, as this pediatrics have on this sector population that is most vulnerable and requires more care and support. According to the studies from the World Health Organization, the number of smokers worldwide has been steadily declining in recent years. So the international body urged countries to step up control measures to end tobacco addiction.
We are releasing the WHO Global Report on Trends in Prevalence of Tobacco Use, which shows that 150 countries are seeing tobacco use rates in decline. 60 of them are declining fast enough to likely meet the ambitious target of a 30% relative reduction in tobacco use by 2025. Just 2 years ago, In the previous report, only 32 countries were on track for these targets.
Tobacco control firms must continue in the face of tobacco industry activism.
Currently, around 1.3 billion people in the world are tobacco users, and that figure is from 2020. The number has already reduced 25 million since 2015, or roughly 5 million tobacco users fewer each year in the past 5 years.
In spite of the risks involved in tobacco consumption, tobacco companies continue to produce without any limitation and produce gigantic profits from the sale of this product that increase the mortality rate in the world. Researchers at the Taizhen Medical University, China, carry out a 10-year study on the effects of the tea and coffee on the body. The study involved about the theory of people and resulted that those who drank between 2 and 3 cups of coffee or between 3 and 5 cups of tea a day had then 32% more healthy drinking and healthier breakfast, were 22% less likely to suffer a brain stroke and 28% less likely to develop dementia compared to people drank to neither coffee or not coffee. However, the author of the study to point out that these diseases are multifactorial, so that treatment they are cured to the be infused with a virus and not what you're looking for. Both tea and coffee contain large amounts of chemicals called phenolates that are all from blueberries or cocoa, and thus have been shown to have benefits in reducing the risk neurodegenerative disease.
Let's now take a look at this week's ephemeris.
Health-focused ephemeris. World AIDS Day is celebrated every December, one opportunity to improve understanding of HBI as global public health issue and to know that action must be taken to progressive final put on this epidemic that is claiming the life of tens of thousands of children and adults. Every December 2 is commemorated the International Day of People with Disabilities, a day whose objective is to disclose the rights that have affirmed committed authorities and institutions towards them.
Now, I invite you to take your cell phone and join us in our social networks: Instagram at Guía Tu Cuerpo TeleSUR, Twitter at Guía Tu Cuerpo TLS, and my Twitter account at JFloresTeleSUR. Next, we will talk about the intestinal tract, the only organ that can function without receiving signals from the brain, because it has its own neurons. We continue with Guard Your Body. In our main topic of the week, we will explain how the intestines work and how they can influence our immune system and even our mood. And we will also know its ability to self-regulate in the next note.
The longest organ of the human body measures between 6 and 8 meters. It is in our digestive system and it is specialized composed in absorbing and assimilating the nutrients of the food we eat. We refer to the intestine, which is composed of 2 parts, the large intestine and the small intestine, and together they form the so-called intestinal tube. It has approximately 200 million neurons, many more than the spinal cord, and it has autonomous nervous system, which allows it, unlike any other organ of our body, to function alone. That is, it is without autonomy to make decisions without need to receive signals from the brain, which is why it is considered the second brain of the human body. The particularity is the organ is because what governs the intestine is the nervous system, which is a branch of the autonomic nervous system, which is directly in charge of controlling the digestive apparatus. This is sustained by the tissue that surrounds the stomach and digestive system and has its own neural circuits. Even the more specialized nervous system cells live in a person's intestine is broadly equivalent to the amount we can find in a cake's brain. Doctors and scientists are becoming increasingly clear that functional or diseases goes beyond simply processing the food produce, and there is even research into whether it could be used to treat autoimmune system disease.
Many scientists are beginning to call our intestine our second brain, and that is why we are finding more and more articles on psychoneurogastroenterology, and more and more psychology and psychiatry professionals are joining the gastroenterology teams.
Even though the neural network of the gut does that every dose is influenced by the state of mind, even sleep, given the direct connection to the brain, many psychiatrists issue emotional alterations such as stress, depression, and neurodegenerative disease, such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, can be related to the state of health of the intestine and to the different emotions, depression, and neurodegenerative disease, such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, can be related to the state of health intestine with face. This is because although the digestive system is subordinated to the brain, they are not a nervous system that in continuous communication that is a millions of neurons in the system and millions of the neurons to the brain maintain and bidirectional communication.
We can measure in the laboratory has the electromagnetic activity of our brain, and similarly measure how is the electromagnetic activity of our intestine. And that is what we have seen, a very powerful study at a mathematical level, but with some very exciting implications that show that these two electromagnetic fields interact. But if we have to say who regulates who, is that what comes out in these mathematical models is that the electromagnetic field of the intestine is one that regulates the electromagnetic field of the brain, and not so much the other way around. Our entire intestine, for example, is covered with up to 2 kilos of tiny bacteria, yeast, and other beings that live in our colon. But not only do we have lice, not only do we have other bugs living in our body. In the colon, we have microorganisms that inhabit all of our skin. They are deposited in different parts of the skin, in different important folds. It's very important the oral microbiota, the oral vaginal microbiota, and the microbiota of the colon. And that is what we normally call it when we talk about the microintestinal microbiota.
The more diversified the diet, the more diversified microbiota, because microbes like different foods and they are key digestion because their activity allows our body to absorb certain nutrients from food. People who always eat the same food have a poorer gut microbiota than those who follow a diversified diet.
The microbiota that we have in our intestine is very much influenced by diet, by the physical exercise we do, by the levels of pollution in the environment in which we live, by the way we were born, by how we manage our stress. There are many studies that today are seeing how changing our diet or taking care of our diet, we also have an improvement at the mood level, how all the emotional systems are regulated.
On the other hand, 70% of the cells in our immune system live in the intestine, which makes the health of the key or immunity against disease. Studies show that if a person has intestinal problems, he or she is likely to be more vulnerable to common illness such as the flu, for example.
Interaction, so to speak, biochemistry between our guts and our brain, neurotransmitters that we have in the brain. There are those packets of information that is passed in neurons from one to another, is highly regulated by the activity of our microbiota, especially with the neurotransmitter, which is serotonin, which is also called the hormone or neurotransmitter of happiness because it's very involved in our mood. Then look, almost 90% of serotonin is produced in the intestine and reach the brain and therefore change the communication of our neurons.
Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that affects many bodily functions, such as intestinal peristalsis. It is also associated with many psychiatric disorders. Its concentration can be reduced by stress and influence mood, anxiety, and the happiness because most of serotonin in the body is a gastrointestinal tract.
We're saying that the hormone of well-being and happiness is in a great part, is not secreted, nor is produced. Here, where by logic we will think it is so, but it's in the instantaneous, or it's wonderful how everything is connected and how everything has to be working in harmony so that result is mental, physical, and spiritual health.
In short, the intestine has multiple functions: digestion of food, absorption of nutrients, constant communication with the brain, and as if it were not enough, the intestinal microbiota is a house there which activates and modulates the immune system to protect us from infections, keeps the inflammatory response under control, and produce exams that have a positive impact on our brain, give us emotional stability and good mood.
Next, we will show you a series of recommendations to keep your digestive tract healthy.
Recommendations to keep our second brain in optimal health. Follow a diverse diet to diversify the intestinal microbiota. Lower your stress level by doing meditation, relaxation, or yoga. If you already have symptoms of a bowel problem, it's the best to avoid alcohol, caffeine, and spicy foods because they can exacerbate them. Sleep well. A study has shown that if you change or disturb your biological clock by altering your sleep patterns, you also disturb your intestinal microbiotes. Incorporating fermented foods, probiotic foods, and fiber into our diets. Increase your intake of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and nuts.
Next, in our positive note, we are going to Cuba, a country to be visited by Italian volunteers to participate in the Soberana Plus Turin clinical trial. We continue with our healthy news. In today's positive note, 35 Italian volunteers between 19 and 59 years of age are visiting Cuba to participate in the clinical trial of Soberana Plus Turin. Details in the following note by our correspondent in Havana, Fabiola Lopez.
They arrived on the island out to the friendship and love that was forget in the most difficult moment of the pandemic, when a brigade of Cuban doctors assisted Turin region during the largest outbreak of COVID-19 in Italy. They would spend a few days in the peaceful surroundings of the symbol of solidarity that is the International Health Center, La Pradera, in the Cuban capital.
In Italy, we have 23% of the population that does not want to be vaccinated, and when we launched the possibility of enrolling in the study, in 3 days we had 250 people enrolled. That is unbelievable, that is not easy to see. There is confidence in the Cuban science and medicine. I am confident because it is a public vaccine that does not have market interest, seeking economic benefits. And I am also confident because there is a technology that has been used for a long time, and it is not something experimental like the Western or North American multinationals. And I am confident in the studies that have already been done during these months and the results of the Cuban medical statistics. Cuba is a socialist society that has as first thing the collective welfare. So, this is the reason why we all know that Cuba is advanced in public health care. The technological improvement, etc. So, I think this is a reason why Cuba has this capacity, and our country does not have it right now.
There is a powerful reason why Michel Curto is also participating in this clinical trial.
This is a country that has vaccinated almost 2 million minors. This is a country that starts the school year with vaccinated children. I am a parent. There are many parents in Italy who are concerned, of course, because our children are unprotected. There is a discussion whether or not to apply vaccines. And here, it is more than evident that there is an availability of a safe protein vaccine designed based on the needs of the children.
Massimiliano Bosa is a cardiologist. He was immunized in Italy with 2 doses of Pfizer. However, he is volunteering for the Soberana Plus during clinical trial because he prefers the 3rd dose to be the Cuban vaccine. He explained that does not speak Spanish very well, but tries to explain to TeleSUR why Italy, being the 7th largest economy in the world, does not have its own vaccine in Cuba. A blockade country has 3 national immunities and 2 vaccine candidates.
In Italy, at the moment, there is no policy to defeat the imperialism that oppresses us. We do what the global finances indicate, what the United States tells us. We do not have a political autonomy of thought, while in Cuba there is an autonomy. Because of the blockade of the United States, there has to be an autonomy, a sovereignty, to fight against the blockade of the United States, and the Cuban economy puts a lot of help to the health of the community.
The leader of the Soberana project, Dr. Bencomo, explained that vaccines such as Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson generate immunity, but not for a very long period of time, and that after 6 months they begin to decline, and not even more so with the appearance of new variants of the virus, which is new Soberana Plus is a good option. He shares that its booster dose, this vaccine increases immunity more than 5 times.
The Pfizer company is hoping to earn $80 billion as a result of the sales of the vaccine. I don't know if you have any idea of what $80 billion is. That is evidently done because it is a good vaccine, but also because of all the protectionism that exists for all medicines, and of course medicines produced in a poor country like Cuba, with a philosophy of providing health and not much money, is a medicine that has a hard time entering that system.
That is why Dr. Bencomo warns this clinical study between Italy and Cuba breaks with the pharmaceutical industry mercantile philosophy. He explained that what we should happen as the world is that the important thing is the quality of the medicine and not where it comes from. Fabiola Lopez, TeleSUR, Havana.
This way we come to the end of our space. I invite you to remain connected on social networks, Instagram at Guía Tu Cuerpo TLSUR, Twitter at Guía Tu Cuerpo TLS, or my Twitter account at jflorestlsur. You can also write us at the email guiatucuerpo@telesurtv.net. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Gerani Flores, and thank you for joining us and allowing us to positively influence your quality of life. See you next week.
En un mundo en constante movimiento, todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos y es necesario conocerlos. Nos preguntamos, ¿qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan? Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturday, only on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English, a critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays, only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The world today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
En un mundo en constante movimiento, todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos y es necesario conocerlos. Nos preguntamos, ¿qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan? Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturday, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays, only on TeleSUR.
The President of Peru, Pedro Castillo, offered a message before the plenary of the Congress addressed to the nation after the approval of the new process of impeachment against him promoted by sectors of the right wing. Russia announces its decision to leave the Council of Europe while accusing NATO and the European Union of manipulating it against Moscow. In the Palestinian-occupied territories, Israeli troops killed 3 young Palestinians during police operations. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. On Tuesday, the President of Peru, Pedro Castillo, offered a message before the plenary of the Congress addressed to the nation after the approval of the new process of impeachment against him promoted by sectors of the right wing. The head of state requested to make use of his constitutional right to address the nation in order to present the achievements made by the executive in his more than 7 months in office. Castillo offered a balance of the progress made by his government in the fight against COVID-19. He also detailed that since the beginning of his government, his objective has been to face most urgent problems in order to improve living conditions of Peruvian people. In Peru, a landslide in the province of Pataz in the department of La Libertad left at least 7 people missing while dozens of homes were buried. The Pataz Regional Councilor Luis Rodriguez reported preliminarily that there were at least 15 houses left underground, and the regional governor Manuel Lempen said that the event covered approximately between 60 and 80 houses. Authorities called an emergency meeting to coordinate search and rescue actions and to detail the magnitude of damage after the landslide. Let's stay in Peru. Fishermen and merchant unions of areas affected by the oil spill that took place 2 months ago in a Repsol installation in front of the Sea of Ventanilla reject the compensation bonus that the company will grant to the victims. The fishermen are demanding the establishment of a dialogue table to reject the bonus of 3,000 soles, equivalent to $802 that the Spanish company will grant to the victims with the approval of Pedro Castillo's government on March 4th. The unions claim that their participation in the negotiations was minimal and that the impact was not equivalent in each of the fishing areas, so the compensation cannot be unique or homogeneous. According to the agency, Repsol reported the leakage of 0.16 barrels of oil in an area of 2.5 square meters. In Venezuela, a meeting of the Special Commission for Dialogue, Peace and Reconciliation of the National Assembly is being held to address issues related to the conciliation and integration of all sectors of the country. The meeting, which is being held at the Miranda Hall of the Federal Legislative Palace in the capital city of Caracas, gathers deputies from different political tendencies represented in the parliament. The President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, leads a meeting in which they discuss relevant issues for the Venezuelan society and its institutionality. At the same time, he called on all the sectors of the country to participate in the reactivation of the National Dialogue Table.
And it's a statement made by the government of the must participate in the dialogue because they also participate in the elections. Some have called to violence, invasion. Some have made some calls. Some have accepted the help from abroad, and others have kept their nationalist characteristics and also have respect for the Constitution. I think that everybody must be incorporated in this dialogue, in this political dialogue. That is the second element mentioned by the President. First, the inclusion of all the Venezuelan society in this process, something that starts today with this extraordinary meeting of the Commission of the National Assembly for the dialogue of peace and reconciliation of the nation.
In his address to the country, the President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, pointed out the need to include all sectors of society in the participation of the talks process.
To be a very inclusive dialogue. It means that everybody will be represented in that dialogue, in that political, social, and economic dialogue. All these sectors of the society of the country should be also represented, all the workers, the cultural people, the civil society, the academy, the students, the fishermen, everybody has the right to have a voice in that process of dialogue.
Jorge Rodriguez spoke about recent relations with the government of Colombia and its behavior with Venezuela.
As you know, last Sunday there were general elections in Colombia. That is a new electoral picture to see the face of Duque in the gardens of the house. It's an anticipation. We have to see the bidding that was given to the Ivan Duque's government. They have some bit behind his back now. It has been very aggressive to the country of Venezuela and the government of Venezuela. And in that sense, after the elections on Sunday, past Sunday, and after the new Congress that they are going to be elected, we will continue to work.
On the same stage, the official spoke about the tutelage relations of certain sectors of the opposition towards the United States. He also expressed that it would be very good for the dialogue to separate such relations from the table.
Face of Duque of the U.S. government, I would have preferred to talk with the owner of the circus. We never had that statement, never had an agenda with that political. Now it's perfectly clear that there is a relation of the opposition of Venezuela. It is clear that there is a relation between the opposition, part of the opposition of Venezuela with the U.S. government. In that sense, for the process of dialogue, it will be very good that they will separate the different relations among the different countries of the world with the ones Venezuela has relations, because now we were looking for an agreement for the future of Venezuela. Thank you very much.
During an interview, the Prime Minister of Belize, John Briceño, was asked if Venezuela could assist the country with the rising fuel prices. So this was his response.
The problem with Venezuela is that the United States have them under sanctions, and that there's absolutely nothing they can do. They can't even move the monies that they have here in Belize to them. So, unfortunately,
you are changing right now.
But we can't do anything. Well, we shall see when that time happens. But even when that happens, Venezuela has already said it's going to take them about a year to be able to get to the production they had before, because a lot of their places are worn and they have to go fix it now.
The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, made an official statement on the progress of the vaccination campaign against COVID-19 and called on the population to receive the booster dose.
People who were adults, we advanced in the children vaccination in the 60%, and we cannot let the guard down. One of the key elements of this stage, in this moment that we are, of high control of coronavirus, is the vaccination. This is one of the key, is that to have the booster jab. And I made a call to all the Venezuelan people, to the population. If you haven't got the booster vaccine, you go and you get the vaccine. This is a family matter. The grandmother, the grandfather, the mother, the father, the children, the young people. We have to motivate this. Let's go to get the booster shot. In Venezuela is the first country in the world that we have scientifically decided to get the booster jab 4 months after the main vaccine, the first one.
We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
Hi and welcome back to From the South. Russia announced its decision to leave the Council of Europe while accusing NATO and the European Union of manipulating it against Moscow. The Russian Foreign Ministry confirmed on Tuesday that it had initiated the procedure to leave the Council of Europe, believing that it is a place used by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to pursue its geopolitical aims. The Russian Foreign Ministry expressed its decision in a letter from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, delivered this Tuesday to the organization. Now, that ministry made it clear in the document that the withdrawal from this space will not harm the rights and freedoms of Russian citizens, and such a decision is in response to the unprecedented policies and sanctions on Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin today noted that Ukraine is not showing seriousness in seeking solutions to the current situation that would be acceptable to both sides. In a telephone conversation with the head of the European Council, Charles Michel, the Russian leader presented his views on the progress of negotiations between Moscow and Kiev, with the aim of working out agreements that would take into account Russia's demands. Among Moscow's conditions to Kiev, Putin underlined the necessity of recognition of the reunification of Crimea to Russia by the Ukrainian authorities and the establishment of guarantees of military neutrality of that state. He also reiterated that Moscow cannot allow Kiev to acquire nuclear weapons and further militarize itself, which is a danger to the country's security. Putin stressed that the continued expansion of NATO to the east is unacceptable to Russia. Joe Biden will travel to Brussels, Belgium on March 24th to meet with the leaders of the NATO alliance and the European Commission to discuss a Ukraine-Russia conflict. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Biden will discuss ongoing deterrence and defense efforts during the NATO summit and reaffirm the U.S. commitment to its NATO allies. The United States out of state will also discuss further sanctions on Russia and hopes to seize the occasion to enhance Western unity on behalf of Ukraine. However, Ukraine's top list petitions like establishing a no-fly zone or providing fighter jets seem to be out of reach. The trip falls in line with Biden's top aides visits, including Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. This announcement comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated his country will not join NATO.
To Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine.
Now, speaking of that, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, denounced the contradictory position of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization regarding its adhesion. During a meeting of the leaders of the member states of the United Kingdom's Joint Expeditionary Force, Zelensky stated that Ukraine understands that it will not be joining the organization. Zelensky said Ukraine does not currently aspire to the activation of Article 5 of the NATO alliance and collective defense, although he considered that the sky of Ukraine must be protected like that of the alliance. Also, Zelensky urged Western countries to significantly increase their supply of military equipment to Ukraine.
It's clear that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We understand it. We are adequate people. We have heard for years about open doors, but we have already heard that we won't be able to join it. It's the truth and it's necessary to admit it. I'm glad that our people understand it and counting on themselves and our partners who help us.
Now switching back to Western Europe. In Spain, Catalan teachers hold protests in Barcelona streets and main cities of Catalonia in rejection to recent educational policies by the Generalitat, the education authorities there. 6 days of protests are scheduled to take place in the country until the end of March. Protests began after the President of the Generalitat, Pere Aragonés, and the Minister of Education, Josep González Cambray, announced on February 10th the early beginning of the 2022-2023 school year and the reduction of school timetable for kindergarten and primary levels. Protesters demanded the resignation of González Cambray for not consulting teachers to carry out educational changes, including modifications to the curriculum for the new school year. They also claimed better salaries while denouncing lack of sanitary conditions to return to schools. And now tension rises on the Korean Peninsula as U.S. military activity in the area increases in response to alleged missile launches. The USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier began military drills in the Yellow Sea, and other U.S. forces stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea stepped up military drills amid signs of alleged imminent North Korean tests using its long-range missiles. Mobilizations of United States warships respond to speculation that North Korea may test its largest intercontinental ballistic missile. Pyongyang said the releases were conducted as preparations for a satellite launch. And we have more news coming up after a final short break. Please stay with us.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
Hello and welcome back. In the occupied territories, Israeli troops killed 3 young Palestinians during different police operations. The first victim, 16-year-old Nader Haitham Rayan, died in an arrest raid outside the northern city of Nablus. The second, Allah Shaham, in his 20s, was killed in Kalandiya, also as a part of a police operation. In the same context, Sanad Salem al-Harbat, a 27-year-old, the father of 3 children, was shot dead by a police unit during an arrest activity in the city of Rahat. Authorities said the number of dead Palestinians killed by Israeli forces reaches 20 only this year. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, on Tuesday to denounce the October military coup that plunged the country into further turmoil. Security forces fired tear gas canisters toward the anti-coup protesters, as well as spraying dyed water. Tuesday's rally was the latest in a series of protests over the military takeover that removed the civilian-led transitional government. The takeover upended Sudan's short-lived transition to democratic rule. Pro-democracy protesters are calling for the establishment of a fully civilian government to complete the now stalled democratic transition. The generals, however, insist that they will hand over power only to an elected government. Elections will take place next year.
We are here today as the No to Women's Oppressions Initiative in solidarity with the resistance committees and to reject the military oppression and the rapes. We reject the military rule and the people behind the coup will surely fall. We will never be oppressed by the rapes or the detentions.
Somalia failed to complete elections for the lower house of parliament by Tuesday, March 15th, which was the deadline set for appointing candidates. This is another delay in the electoral process that should lead to the appointment of a new president, which has been expected for over a year. The Somali government, which last month extended the deadline for completing the appointment of members of the lower house, had made no new announcements by Tuesday evening. The federal states of Southwest and Galmudug concluded the election of their representatives, but 40 out of the 275 seats in the lower house remain to be filled in 3 states, Jubaland, Ishabelle, and Puntland. The closure of the lower house election is a crucial step towards the election of a new president. The Pritzker Prize, architecture's most prestigious award, was awarded Tuesday to Burkina Faso-born architect Diébedo Francis Kéré, the first African to win the honor in its more than 40 years of history. Kéré, 56 years old, was hailed for his pioneering designs that are sustainable to the earth and its inhabitants in lands of extreme scarcity. Tom Pritzker, chairman of the Hyatt Foundation that sponsors the award, said in a statement, Kéré, a dual citizen of Burkina Faso and Germany, is the 51st recipient of the illustrious prize since it was first awarded in 1979. He is renowned for building schools, health facilities, housing, civic buildings, and public spaces across Africa.
I am speechless. I have a feeling of overwhelming honor, but also a sense of responsibility. I simply feel honored. That is unexpected. It was never in my dream. Even my dream full of fantasy, I never thought that this work that I was doing, as a duty to my people that has paved my career would ever be connected to the Pritzker Foundation. So I feel I am the happiest man on the planet.
We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also join us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Diego Martin. Thanks for watching.
En un mundo en constante movimiento, todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos y es necesario conocerlos. Nos preguntamos, ¿qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan? Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Dotting the I. Saturday, only on TeleSUR. In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer, so start I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and your rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police state. I can't breathe, that's why I take a knee. Won't take you for slavery. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. And I ask you to please give thanks. Not only for God's noise, but please give thanks as part of a movement to build a new society. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class, to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united will prevail. Oh, say, can you see Rome is over? Oh, build a new. I'll build a new. Oh, build a new. I'll build a new. Oh, build a new. I'll build a new.
Hi, you're watching TeleSUR English. I am Dio Martin. Here are the headlines at the moment. On Tuesday, the president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, offered a message before the plenary of the Congress addressed to the nation after the approval of the new process of impeachment against him promoted by sectors of the right wing. The head of state requested to make use of his constitutional right to address the nation in order to prevent the achievements made by the executive in his more than 7 months in office. Castillo offered a balance of the progress made by his government in the fight against COVID-19. He also detailed that since the beginning of his government, his objective has been to face the most urgent problems in order to improve the living conditions of Peruvians. Russia announced its decision to leave the Council of Europe while accusing NATO and the European Union of manipulating that body against Moscow. The Russian Foreign Ministry confirmed on Tuesday that it had initiated the procedure to leave the Council of Europe, believing that it is a space used by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to pursue its geopolitical aims. The Russian Foreign Ministry expressed its decision in a letter from the Foreign Minister himself, Sergei Lavrov, delivered this Tuesday to the organization. The Russian Foreign Ministry made it clear in the document that the withdrawal from this space will not harm the rights and freedoms of Russian citizens, and such a decision is in response to the unprecedented policies and sanctions against Russia. In the occupied territories, Israeli troops killed 3 young Palestinians during different police operations. The first victim, a 16-year-old Nader Haitham Rayan, died in an arrest raid outside the northern city of Nablus. The second, Alaa Shaham, in his 20s, was killed in Kalandia, also as part of a police operation. In the same context, Sanad Salem al-Harbad, 27-year-old and father of 3 children, was shot dead by a police unit during an arrest activity in the city of Rahat. Authorities said the number of dead Palestinians killed by Israeli forces reaches 20 only this year. Those are the headlines at the moment. For more content, check our website, TeleSUR English. I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.
Hi, how are you? Welcome. I'm Paula Perez. It seems the European Union is in trouble because of the same sanctions they imposed on Russia. Is this a political miscalculation? How can we understand it? Russia is the world's largest wheat exporter and Ukraine the fifth, providing 19% of the world's barley supply, 14% of the wheat, and 4% of corn, and selling 52% of the world's sunflower oil. After the beginning of this special military operation in the Donbas region, fertilizer prices have risen sharply due to the increase of the price of natural gas, the main ingredient for nitrogen fertilizers. Commodity prices are spiking. Many economic experts are reporting that wheat has reached its highest price ever. Is this the beginning of an inflationary surge in the price of wheat, corn, and other commodities? We're going to analyze all of these contexts in today's critical move. Let us deploy the board. Our move begins now. Join me. In view of the UN warnings, experts anticipate that the number of undernourished people around the world could increase between 8 and 13 million between 2022 and 2023. We're on the way to a global food inflation of no return. Let us review some impressions. Food, fuel, and fertilizer prices are skyrocketing. Supply chains are collapsing, and transportation costs and delays for imported goods, when available, are at record levels. And all of this is affecting the poorest and planting the seeds for instability and unrest throughout the world. 45 from African and less developed countries import at least one-third of their wheat from Ukraine or Russia. 18 of these countries import at least 50%. This includes countries such as Burkina Faso, Egypt, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. We must do everything possible to prevent a hurricane of hunger and the collapse of the world food system. We're not doing very well globally. Unfortunately, even before the pandemic, hunger was slowly increasing, and then the pandemic came. And now we are 161 million more hungry people than before the pandemic, totally an estimated 821 million people. So we are not doing well, unfortunately, and there are new challenges that we unfortunately know about, like the Ukrainian war, in Ukraine. The areas in Ukraine and Russia are on the world's leading producers of grain and other raw materials for fertilizers and energy production, and those are all factors that in fact have a major impact not only on food availability but on food prices. So, unfortunately, we will have to be cautious, but we can see a major impact on global food security. The raw material for the manufacture of nitrogen fertilizers is ammonia, and this ammonia is derived from natural gas. Any event that has an impact on gas or on ammonia, and I remind you that Russia accounts for 25% of world ammonia exports. Any event that has an impact on one of these products has an impact on fertilizers and inevitably on agriculture. Lebanon imports approximately 80% of its wheat from Ukraine. Lebanon consumes between 6,200 and 6,300 tons of wheat per year. Last year, we imported 5,200 tons of wheat from Ukraine and the rest from Russia, Moldova, and Romania. Of course, we are going to be affected by the crisis since the beginning of the war. We talked to the Minister of Economy, the Prime Minister, the Governor of the Central Bank to find a new mechanism to speed up the process of finding alternatives to imports from countries like Romania, Serbia, Hungary, and Bulgaria. These countries are a part of the Black Sea region are now closed and have banned the imports of all their food supplies to protect their national interests. Let us add updated information with our correspondent Odette Diaz from the capital of Russia, Moscow. Odette is giving us details on this matter. Hello, Odette. Greetings, colleague. Thanks for the contact. Economic sanctions against Russia continue to be an issue for discussion and uncertainty these days. not only for Moscow, but also for those who mean to asphyxiate the Eurasian nation. One of the affected sectors is that of food production, due to the shortage of fertilizers in Europe and all over the world. Russia and Ukraine are two of the main food and farm producers worldwide. And in the case of Russia, it also produces large amounts of nutrients like potassium and phosphate, key ingredients of fertilizers that allow the growth of plants and crops. Amid all of these, the president of one of the largest fertilizer companies in the world has said that the Russia-Ukraine conflict will have impact on world supplies and food prices. Yara International, operating in more than 60 countries, buys considerable amounts of essential raw materials in Russia. The head of this company, Svein Tor Holsether, warned that the situation could become even more difficult. The businessman assured that half the world's population gets food because of the use of fertilizers, and if that is out, the yield for some crops will be reduced up to 50%. And since everything works as a chain and the effects are like a boomerang, the sanctions to the Russian hydrocarbons is also reflected in the agro-industrial sector because, according to Holsether, the price of fertilizers was already high due to the growing cost of fuel. Analysts have also warned that the measures translate in greater costs for farmers and less crops yields, which means even higher costs for food. For Yara's president, the world should, in the long term, reduce its dependency on Russia for the worldwide food production. However, that is a reality that is far from an actual possibility due to Russia's importance in the productive sector, not only for Europe, but also globally speaking. So far, a few details on this particular issue. Now we go back to the studio. Thank you very much, Odette. Diaz from the capital of Russia, Moscow. So we're now doing a map of the behavior of poverty and extreme poverty by regions. World extreme poverty. According to the World Food Programme, 735 million people in the world face crisis levels of hunger or worse, while another 130 million will find themselves on the brink of starvation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019, the United Nations Development Programme published a report on the levels of poverty in the world. These are the numbers. In Africa, 84.5% of poor people live in countries located south of Sahara Desert. South Sudan and Niger have a poverty rate of 91.9% and 90.5% respectively, compared to 14.9% in Gabon and 6.3% in South Africa. In Asia, the study includes data from countries such as Afghanistan with a poverty rate of 55.9% or the Maldives, but the rate is 0.8%. Meanwhile, in the southern countries, 546 million people live in poverty, of which 200 million suffer from extreme poverty. In America, according to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the number of poor people in the region will increase from the current 185 million to some 220 million, out of the region's 620 million inhabitants. The number of people living in extreme poverty will rise from 64.4 million to 90 million. In Europe, according to data provided by the statistical agency Eurostat, some 113 million people are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Their income is 60% lower than the average of the state in which they live. These figures represent 22.5% of the total population of the European Union, which means 1 person in 4. According to the United Nations, Spain is the country most affected with 26.1% poverty rate. In 2018, more than 55% of this population experienced some degree of difficulty in making ends meet. 29.5% of the children were at risk of poverty or social exclusion. In Oceania, according to the Vatican Press Agency, Australia is one of the most stable countries in the world, but 13.2% of its population lives below the poverty line, a number that includes 739,000 children. Let's take our first pause and our critical move with our invitation for you to participate in our strategic move. Our invitation for you to participate through our social media accounts in Twitter. I'm sharing the addresses @Jugacritica, @TeleSUR Today, our issue is centered: could the European Union compensate the suspension of grain and sunflower imports from Russia? Has the European Union bloc measured the impact of sanctions against Moscow that might bring about a global crisis and world inflation? What does the Euro say? What's your opinion? Coming back with the analysis. According to records of the United Nations and the World Food Program, 135 million people suffer from famine. Let's review the scenario and the causes of this situation accelerated not only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also due to the permanent tension in Eastern Europe. A report prepared by FAO last November 4th revealed an unprecedented increase in food prices worldwide. In October 2021, it reached an average of 133.2 points, placing it at 31.8 points, an increase that translates into more than 30%. According to the organization, these prices have not been registered since 2011, due to the rise in the price of cereals and vegetable oils. One of the main reasons for the increase in food prices in the rise is the rise in energy costs and in the supply chain. Prior to this report in 2020, the director of the World Food Program, David Beasley, warned that the number of people suffering from acute hunger could double. These statements are in response to the alarming figure released in 2019, where nearly 135 million people in more than 55 countries experienced extreme food insecurity. The causes of this situation lie in food scarcity as conflicts, climate change, the progressive eradication of biodiversity, or commercial speculation, which directly affect food security. The World Report on Food Crisis in 2020 pointed out that about 77 million of those who suffer food insecurity in 2009 were located in countries affected by armed conflicts. The rise of temperatures makes weather patterns change, periods of droughts are lengthening, water shortages are becoming more and more pressing, and desertification is advancing, driving out populations. The UN points out that there have already about 250 million people affected by this phenomenon, and even warns about the existence of climate refugees. The crisis generated by the coronavirus is resulting in the confrontation of a new pandemic, but this time it will be famine. The directors of the United Nations World Program warned that the number of people suffering from hunger in the world could reach 265 million due to the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19. Earlier in 2020, the World FP asked the UN Security Council to launch a campaign that could avert a famine crisis, in addition to highlighting the urgency of a global ceasefire to put an end to armed conflicts that put millions of people in humanitarian emergency. However, following the outbreak of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in February 2020, experts fear that this could affect the world's food supply and the cost of food. Let us review how the media is portraying this problem, which is also shadowed by the corporate media, especially what is related to this conflict in Ukraine. The Mexican Sun newspaper is using as a headline, "Rise of Food Prices Threatens with Increasing Hunger in the World." They highlight that what is happening in that country, in the planet, actually around the special military deployment of Russia, particularly in the Donbas area, initiated on February 24th. They write about an increase in food prices, which threatens to increase hunger in poorest countries and jeopardize food sovereignty for many other nations. Due to agricultural supply chain disruptions in Ukraine and Russia, major grain exporters, the prices of wheat, corn, barley, sunflower oil, and fertilizers have spiked globally. according to the United Nations reports and alerts. Now let's analyze this matter. We have from Spain, Juan Luis González Pérez, a political analyst, international political analyst, and we're talking to him from now. Thank you for your time to TeleSUR, for TeleSUR. Thank you. So we've been reviewing several portals, news portals, and all of them talk about the increase of fertilizer prices. Beyond the cut in grain supplies, something that is assumed by Russia with the sanctions and absurd sanction packages from the European Union and US. So what's the role of the fertilizers in the food production? Because we're talking about famine, which could be increased a lot more than which has been generated due to COVID-19 pandemic. What's your read? So obviously, if we are at a time in which food production, especially basic food production of people who use it every day, is reduced because they're taking Russia out of the equation of the market, obviously they have to supply it somehow. And the way to supply it is to overproduce it somewhere else. So production depends mainly on the need of the fertilizers, and all fertilizers are in the hands of Russia. So we see that there is a problem that has no solution. The only solution that we could find is let's produce more fertilizers somewhere else. But that means to start factories and new mines that nobody wants to open because Russian fertilizers are very cheap. So if you're making a huge investment in opening a mine for fertilizers, and then 7 months from there Russia agrees, has a peace agreement, and comes back with their products in the market, they will sink this investment and this new enterprise. So in the northern of the world, we're coming closer to spring, and this is a time for starting to plant the produce we will consume all over the year. So if the fertilizers disappear from the market, we are at a very complicated moment. So to produce many of these fertilizers, it is absolutely necessary to have natural gas. So because of this crisis, military crisis, the natural gas have record prices worldwide. So we are talking that the cost of gas is around 80% of the production cost of some fertilizers like ammonia. So this is a perfect storm that could only end up in a food crisis worldwide. It is absurd that we're talking about this right now because we're trying, this is just because the US wants to get Ukraine in NATO, and this will be fixed with a phone call from Biden, and the world would cease to go into a food crisis, especially the poorest countries that have no capacity of supply. So we're going to be, the European countries are going to become poorer, but we can certainly sort out this problem. So this is an issue that seems absurd, but it's real. So those who are paying for the increase and the hardening of these sanctions are the inhabitants of the European Union, so the farmers who need the forage to. So for our Latin American audience, it is part of this productive chain. If they don't have the raw materials, they cannot produce these kind of fertilizers. So Russia, as one of the countries that is most important in the export and supply of these basic products for food production and the agricultural development. So these unilateral measures by the US and the European Union, haven't they measured the real impact of these sanctions? Do you think there's been a political miscalculation with these sanctions that have already become a boomerang right at the time when they were announced? I think the responsible for the European Union and the US have measured the repercussion, but at some point, with this media war campaign over the heads of the Western countries, it seems that everybody's going to blame Putin and nobody's going to look to their own governments. As we say here, lies have short legs. So when people actually see they cannot take the car, they cannot buy certain food because they're not out of the markets, because their lives are becoming even poorer, and this is all because of some sort of whim. I think people will start complaining their governments, and they will force them somehow to stop this stupid thing. I think this is outrageous to cut Russia. They haven't measured this quite right, because Russia is not like taking Spain out of the market, it's taking Russia out of the market. You're taking the largest country. I think the world cannot live without Russia. And despite the economic sanctions, they're threatening countries trading with Russia. If we live in a crisis time and we have reached a moment in which our resources are finite, I think Russia will find other markets, and those who are going to lose their markets, those markets is the European Union. If the Europe is closed, Asia is opened. So Pakistan will buy all the oil, China will buy part of the gas, and any country that, in the fear of receiving sanctions from the US, they will be able to buy that wheat or those fertilizers from Russia. It is not worth it for a whim to get Ukraine in NATO, to attack Russia. Russia is too big. Russia can live without the world, but the world cannot live without Russia. I think that's the conclusion I get from all of this. So let's visualize another scenario that could be a way out, an alternative way out. So the European Union is practically not able to compensate for the lack of imports of grain and sunflower oil, which is what Russia exports the most, and Ukraine as well, to the European Union. So before that, facing the lack of productive capacity and the lack of supplies, this brings about an alert by the United Nations. How to face this situation? What should be the way out for this situation? And the pressure of the livestock sector and the farm sector to the European Union and to the West. The situation will not only derived in the lack of this kind of food, but also in the fact that they could induce a world inflation without precedents. So we know how this has started, but we don't know how it's going to end. So in my country, they're talking about fishing fleets that will stop going out into the ocean because of the price of fuel. So there is a general strike of transporters because they cannot work with the prices of gasoline. There are companies like the greatest artisan company in the world that is saying that since if the price of electricity continues to go up, they will have to shut down. This will bring a debacle, an in-chain debacle that would affect all the European cities without distinction. We cannot forget that we come from the crisis of 2018, from which we have never been able to surpass. Also the COVID crisis, and we have problems in the food distribution chain all over the world that is not fully solved, and then we're getting into this insane thing. It seems the US wants to repeat the Russian sanctions against China. In the end, sanity will have to prevail, and people will have to protest because despite all propaganda, they won't have any credibility, and it will be worth it, and we have to take measures, and these measures will have to be to agree with Putin, which have been talking with them, which means the neutrality of Ukraine, independence of the Donbass. I think with these two issues, the war will be solved. And what is about to happen, which is an authentic plague, which is a lot worse than what we have lived so far. So this situation could escalate even more. This is one of the concerns of the economic experts. We're not only talking about the increase of prices, especially in wheat. For many nations, this is for basic products, but also chemicals. There is concern because the European Union is not able to take on the Russian role in the production of these chemicals and these fertilizers for the production. Not even Latin America. Let us remember that the European Union has certain restrictions to be able to import these agrochemicals, especially from Argentina and the US, because they will have to modify the restrictions, something that would not be easy for them. What do you think? So if on top of what we have now, we start talking about countries that are sanctioned, and sanctions that prevent them from taking on these kind of exports. So the only thing we're going to do is to increase or worsen this problem. So there can be substitutes for these harvests, which will give us to eat by the end of the year, but we're already late for this. So it seems like some countries will be allowed to trade with Russia despite the sanctions, because Russia continues to pump gas to Europe through Ukraine. I think if we want to get out of this, I think fertilizers should be considered as the absolutely basic product from which the economy depends on, and the millions of people. If we talk about Ukrainian wheat or Russian wheat, we're talking about Middle East, Africa. There are areas that are at the brink of famine, and uprisings are foreseen, and we have to stop this anyhow. This is a real insane thing. We cannot forget this is all written in the 2019 report. The United States have done this knowingly that they were going to cause this war, and of the indirect and direct consequences of this. So we were listening to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky they're absolutely clear. They have told that the doors of NATO are open to us, but I'm sure they're closed. And in the middle of this Russian response to sanction high officials of the US, among them Joe Biden, and they have determined to get out of the European Council. And they have said this body has become an anti-Russian body. These are measures that respond to these sanctions escalate, which only seek to fuel up the tensions in Europe, in Eastern Europe. So what's the role of the United Nations, this multilateral body that should provide guarantees, but also try to sit the U.S. in this negotiation table, the fifth round already, to get a peaceful way out of the conflict. So the United Nations, they have no role, actually. So with their architecture and their capability in some countries, we cannot force the U.S. to sit on the table because they are exercising their veto vote. So you cannot force the U.S. to sit on the table. Anyway, the U.S. seems to be playing behind the curtains. They don't want to be more anymore very much visible. They don't want to be visible. But the U.S. is the ones that are fueling this war, and poor Zelensky has been a puppet in the hands of the North American, the U.S. He is already broken. So they have told him NATO no, European not to European nation, and they have already lost the war. Russia has taken the largest cities. They have been sieged for the last couple of days. So they have no other option than surrender. So the U.S., I think they're saying when to surrender or not. Zelensky has been a real puppet. They have no other choice to break ties with the U.S. and find their own path and find their own autonomy and reach an agreement as soon as possible. And in alignment with these economic shortages, which will be famine and death for most of the people if they don't find an agreement. So these are the consequences in the worst scenario ahead, and we're actually looking at the real role of the United States in this war. So I'd like to thank you for joining us in the first stage of analysis, for your geopolitical vision, and for help us understand the real impact of the sanctions by the West, but also these global crisis and how this will end up in a famine with no return. Thank you for your time for TeleSUR. We're marking a new pause and sharing with you our strategic move. Could the European Union compensate the exports of grains of sunflower from Russia? Has the European Union bloc measured the impact of sanctions against Moscow that might bring about a global crisis and world inflation? Coming back with the analysis. We'll be back soon. The wide gaps between economic empowerment and opportunity for social development are today more prominent between rich and the poor due to neoliberal policies implemented by capitalist governments. The United Nations organization points out that today we live in a world richer in resources, but also more, as too many people work deny their social and economic rights, including the 800 million who still live in extreme poverty. The organization warns that a quarter of the world's population suffers from severe poverty, which indicates the most resounding failure of the neoliberal economic policies of capitalist countries. More than 800 million people live on less than $1.25 a day and have no access to food or drinking water, as the United Nations Development Program points out. But the economic aspect that generates a lack of resources has its cause in the implementation of neoliberal policies, which widens the gap between the rich and the poor. Income inequality is on the rise, with the richest 10% earning up to 40% of the total income. In Latin America, one of the structural problems of development is the inequality caused by neoliberal governments. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean reported in 2019 that 246 million Latin Americans live in poverty and extreme poverty. The CEPAL called on governments to implement policies to this phenomenon and reduce inequality. This situation has caused dissatisfaction among broad sectors in the region, especially those who find it increasingly difficult to access education, health services, or the pension system. As a result, since 2019, citizens in Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, and Haiti have led public protests in rejection of the increasing inequality, the growth of poverty, and the state's disregard for the vast majority of the population. Let us continue with the analysis. From Argentina, we have Ernesto Maras, economist and international analyst. How are you, Ernesto? Thank you for your time for TeleSUR. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Todo bien, Ernesto. Nos gustaría
All
que
good,
nos ayudes
Ernesto.
a analizar
We'd
este
like you
tema
to
desde el
help
área
us understand
económica
this
para poder entender el verdadero impacto, no solamente de las
issue from the
sanciones que
economic area, not
impone
only the
Occidente y la
sanctions
Unión
imposed
Europea
by the
contra
West
Rusia,
and the
sino
European Union
también
against
el
Russia,
efecto boomerang que
but
ya se
the
siente
boomerang
sobre todo en
effect
el
that is
bloque
already
europeo
been
y
felt
con
by the
ello la
European bloc,
determinación de Rusia
and the
de
Russia's
prohibir la
determination to
exportación de
forbid
granos y sobre todo de
grain
estos
exports
fertilizantes
and
indispensables
fertilizers
para la producción
that are
agrícola,
indispensable
no
for
solamente en el
agricultural
continente europeo,
production,
sino
not
también
only
en
to
gran
the
parte de
European
América Latina.
continent,
Es
but
decir,
also in Latin
esto,
America.
dicen algunos expertos,
This,
podría generar una
by
crisis
some
inflacionaria
experts
global.
say, could
Muchos
generate
de ellos
a
coinciden
global
que podría
crisis.
ser un principio
That could
sin
be
retorno.
the beginning
En
of something
análisis
that would
económico,
have no
hay
end,
un cambio ya en el tablero
nothing to go back from.
geoeconómico. Vamos a ver palpar quizás una
So
modificación
we're
de
gonna
una
look at a
polarización de la economía
polarization
con
of
estos
economy
últimos
with these
acontecimientos.
latest events.
Sí, si bien la
Yeah,
polarización va a existir,
if
me parece
with
que el
polarization,
equilibrio va a estar puesto por China en
we'll have
esta
to see
suerte
China in
de
this
evitar, digamos,
sort of
un
way
desastre,
to prevent in this
en términos
disaster
económicos.
in
Digamos,
terms
uno de
in
los
economic terms.
fertilizantes,
So
uno de los
fertilizers,
componentes muy
what are the
importantes es el gas.
most important
Y en
components
ese
is
caso,
gas,
obviamente, si Europa
and obviously,
necesita
if Europe
de fertilizantes,
needs
lo van a conseguir
fertilizers,
en otro país, digamos.
they'll have to get it somewhere
Por
else,
otro
in
lado,
a
las
different country.
principales empresas,
On the other side, on the other
las
hand,
primeras que están son las chinas y las
so the main
norteamericanas,
enterprises are
lo que
the
tiene que
Chinese
ver
and
con
the
este con
US
fertilizantes,
companies that
con
need
agroquímicos.
fertilizers.
Entonces ahí es donde empieza a jugar un poco
So
el tablero
that's
económico
where the
de
economic
ver
board
estos países qué rol van a
starts
jugar.
playing and
Ahora, en
which
este
role these
contexto
countries
de
are going to
fuerte
play.
demanda, de necesidad de productos agrícolas, de
So
falta
for the
de
need of
insumos,
agricultural
los países exportadores
products
de
and
materia
the lack of
prima
supplies and raw
estudian
materials,
en este momento, digamos,
right now,
poner un freno también a sus
they have
productos que
to
importan a
stop
la zona
the
europea,
export of products
porque
to the European
justamente
area
van a tensionar
Union,
los alimentos que se
because
consumen en la
they
región.
will provoke a
Desde
tension in the
la
food,
carne,
the
los productos
food,
derivados de trigo, los productos derivados
wheat
del maíz,
derived
los
from those
productos que se cultivan de la
wheat
soja.
derived
Entonces acá
derivatives
empieza a haber
from
una
food of
tensión
wheat.
de o resguardamos el cuidado de
So they have
Europa
to think that either we
sin ningún
safeguard
costo,
the
puede ser
Europe,
dejamos un libre comercio,
if we
o
allow
administramos
the
el
free
comercio para
trade,
que
or if we manage
esta
trade
rentabilidad de la demanda
so
fuerte
that
que
the
va a tener Europa a futuro,
profitability
con
of
estas
this market
condicionalidades que hoy tiene, no se la
with these
queden
conditions
algunos cuantos
would not
cada
be
una
only for
de las
some
economías,
of the
digamos,
economies,
productoras y exportadoras de
for
materia
instance,
prima. Y ahí me
exports
parece que
and
va a estar un
imports of
poco
raw
el
materials.
juego de cada nación para que esa inflación que de alguna
So this
manera
is
ya
how
hoy
we
se
played
siente
for this
tanto en
inflation that is
Europa,
already
Canadá,
being felt in Europe,
Estados
in Canada, and the
Unidos,
United
no
States,
impacte
will
demasiado
not
a los
impact
países de la
too
periferia.
much in the
Estados Unidos le preocupa mucho el papel que
peripheral
juega
countries.
China en torno a estas
So the
sanciones
United States
impuestas
is very
contra
concerned
Rusia.
about
No
the
ayuda, sino
China
más
in these
advertencia al gigante
sanctions.
asiático
They
de
have
que no
been
le
more
sirva
than
como un
warning to
salvavidas
the
al país
giant
aislado.
Asian
Y
giant
esto, sin lugar a
not to
dudas,
aid
da también
the
suspicacia dentro del análisis
Slavic country.
económico. ¿Por qué tanta la preocupación de
Why
Estados
so much
Unidos?
concern
Si
from the
China
US if
logra
China
afianzar aún más
manages
estas
to
relaciones que tiene
tighten
sostenidas
these
con
relations
Rusia,
with
que
Russia?
no lo va a dejar solo, lo ha
They
ratificado
won't
una
leave
y
them
otra vez.
alone. They have said that
¿Podría de alguna manera
several times.
mitigar,
Could they
minimizar esas sanciones
mitigate these
impuestas contra
sanctions
Rusia?
imposed
Porque
by
inclusive
to Russia?
podríamos ver aún más fortalecido el
Because
yuan.
we could
Sería
see
interesante
the
ver cómo se ha
yuan, their
comportado esta
currency,
moneda
even more
desde que iniciaba esta operación militar
stronger.
especial, sobre todo en la región del Donbass.
So we have seen
¿Qué
this
opinas?
after this military
Bueno,
incursion in Donbass.
Ucrania, que
So in this Ukraine
las
area,
que terminan con Stan, digamos, ¿no? Uzbekistán, Kazajistán,
and this area with Uzbekistan and
ese
Kazakhstan,
lugar es fundamental en gas,
this
petróleo,
area,
en
this
gas,
place is
y es un valle
important
rico.
in oil, in
Ahora,
gas.
viendo todo este proceso,
Looking at
desde
this process
2014
from
en adelante,
2014 on,
más allá de la expansión de la OTAN y el
beyond
cerco a
NATO
Rusia,
expansion and the siege of
me
Russia,
parece que el objetivo final de Estados
I think
Unidos
the
no es
final
Rusia,
goal is not Russia, it's China.
China ya es hoy la potencia principal.
China is the main
el
power,
país que comercia con
is a
tiene
country that
este tipo de intercambios en moneda de yuan
trades with the yuan with half the countries of the world. They also have a relation with Argentina, and they have been working with Russia in a system that is not SWIFT.
Logró aislar
So the U.S. managed to isolate Iran. So they are working on a counterpart with, it's similar to SWIFT, but it's Russia and China have been working on this. But it is possible to start building a products exchange without the need of the dollar, of using the US dollar. So we're going to a world where these two countries are in dispute. The rest are playing a different role. The trade dispute for the Latin American countries, Russia, the US has it with China, not with Russia. So they are accompanying, Russia is accompanying the foreign policy of China in the region. So this is a dispute because the yuan is a currency that is in the. This places China in the position that they can rescue another country. So their foreign policy has a continuity, China's foreign policy. So we're talking about gas and oil, and who supplies for the liquefied gas to Germany. We're talking about products and markets, and we have to see who's the dominant in each one of the markets. So this economic mapping, which is very interesting to see who is. So with these sanctions imposed by the US and the European Union are motivating the internal economy in Russia. So the ruble will intensify and grow stronger within Russia with the purchase of raw material from China and India. They're using a different kind of economic mechanism. They are getting out of the US orbit. Would they be able to change, to manage, to create a different financial system? Maybe the US have not managed to analyze this. So if they keep forbidding China from helping Russia and they might impose sanctions against India, so what's their financial system going to work for the US? If China and Russia will continue working on their own currencies, so the dollar will practically, the US dollar will practically be obsolete in this probably disturbing scenario for the US. Could this influence the geoeconomic aspect of the planet? So the yuan and the US dollar will be the strongest currencies. We're in a moment of currency sovereignty. That's why Russia left the European Union. They maintain their sovereign currency. So these countries that have carried out the integration process, commercial, financial, with this Second Route Belt, the exchanges with the Asian Pacific area, this allows China somehow to impose their place where they have the company of the Asian Bank, but also with the International Monetary Bank. China did not vote against the funds of the Argentinian funds debt. China will not leave spaces because this would allow him to have influence. There will be slow steps in which they will become stronger in their economic and financial exchange, and they will have a dispute. Today the US is leading, is managing the International Monetary Fund, but that at some point will be in dispute And we'll see how the U.S. will position themselves with the advance of China, and China will be advancing in economic bloc, maybe with Russia, countries in Asia. And this implies economic interests that which have to do with who rules this time of the 21st century. So finally, I would like to ask, some sectors have pronounced, like the livestock sector in Spain, that it needs fertilizers, and they've seen an increase of 30% of prices of these fertilizers and these raw materials, that they don't manage to supply the entire market. So with these sanctions imposed, these are not going to be the only sector that rises against these sanctions with the intensity of this conflict in Europe. So do you think these sanctions imposed by the West and the European Union could go back or stop their level, or will they manage to achieve a negotiation? So I think this is a space they leave for Chinese influence in Europe. This is a main exporter to Europe in products manufactured. The European Union is very dependent on China, so there is a commercial diplomacy, and we have to see how they solve this. Either they change provider, and we have to see how this impacts, and how this, we'll have to see if China wants to lose this main buyer, or if the European Union will turn to the United States or some Latin American country that can supply these products. So China cannot afford to lose economic spaces. I think the discussion is going to be around this, and maybe this Russian situation will give a space to export products not only from Russia but also from China. Maybe if the food production will not increase. So the measures, the sanctions from the European Union and the sanctions will not be able to continue in time. And this European Union is totally dependent on gas and food and raw materials to be able to guarantee the food for the population that could derive in inflation and hunger and famine, not only in this year but also at the beginning of the 2023. So there's been a spike in the price of food due to the effects of the COVID-19. Last question. How the economic recovery of the country will affect, will this recovery will be fast, slow with this crisis in Ukraine? So the recovery will happen, is already projected by CEPAL and some countries of the region, the growth in the European countries. Maybe this what concerns is the impact in the energy. Also, energy from one year to the other increased in 1,500%, food and energy in Europe. So this impacts directly on the working European class. So this must be considered by the governments in Europe, because what are they betting Ukraine? Because if this impacts on the European workers, so the cost is going to be paid by the worker, the European worker. So that's what they have to analyze, if it is worth to support NATO in this expansionist plan, and they're influencing a conflict that should be solved as it corresponds through the diplomatic way, and this will not impact the world. too much. So all the scenarios and the aspects on the table to this situation on the alert by the United Nations in the increase of hunger due to the crisis of Ukraine, and to the hardening of this sanction package, the largest emitted against a country like Russia in this case. So besides this, the response of Russia to the sanctions to the top officials of the U.S., not the population, there is a clear message here, and also the prohibition of the first Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, to enter Russia. So we're talking about the tension where the president, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, is clear they are not going to be part of NATO. If there is determination of Ukraine not to become a part of NATO, this escalation should be over by now. So the truth is, once again, the fact that the U.S. is using Ukraine is uncovered for that they're using them for the geostrategic platform. Thank you for your time and for your analysis, geoeconomic analysis, to understand the real impact of these sanctions and which will bring about hunger in the next couple of years. That's the end of the program. We're closing the board for today. Thank you for your attention. We'll see you next program.
We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean. In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer. So start your climb up the money tree. The best slaves are those who think they're free. unfolds. People struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and your rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police state. I can't breathe, that's why I take a knee. Won't take you for slavery. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. And I ask you to please give thanks, not only for God's voice, but please give thanks as part of a movement to build a new society. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class, to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united, we'll prevail. Oh, say, can you see Rome is over? Oh, build a new. 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 Oh, build a new.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
En un mundo en constante movimiento, todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos y es necesario conocerlos. Nos preguntamos, ¿qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan? Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturday, only on TeleSUR.
Hi, you're watching TeleSUR English. I'm Dio Martin. Here are the headlines at the moment. On Tuesday, the president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, offered a message before the plenary of the Congress addressed to the nation after the approval of the new process of impeachment against him promoted by sectors of the right wing. The head of state requested to make use of his constitutional right to address the nation in order to present the achievements made by the executive in his more than 7 months in office. Castillo offered a balance of the progress made by his government in the fight against COVID-19. He also detailed that since the beginning of his government, his objective has been to face most urgent problems in order to improve the living conditions of Peruvians. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Wednesday that despite negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, they are not the smoothest. The parties are hopeful that a consensus can be achieved. Lavrov made this statement during an interview with a Russian media outlet. He also described this current situation as historic, saying that this is a battle which will result into a new world order. Russia's top diplomat said that his assessment on the ongoing dialogue between Moscow and Kiev is based on the considerations made by Russian negotiators. With regards to the work of the binational teams, Lavrov urged negotiators to work in a more relaxed atmosphere without provoking situations of hysteria and unnecessary tension. The Arab League denounced on Wednesday the Israeli escalation in the occupied Palestinian territories and called on the United Nations Security Council to stop Tel Aviv's crimes against the Palestinian people. The League meeting in Cairo said that at least 20 Palestinian citizens of different ages and both sexes have been executed by Tel Aviv's occupying army this year. They condemned the demolition of Palestinian homes in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the displacement of people and the mass arrests of innocent civilians without due process. They claimed that the state terrorism practiced by Israel against Palestinians perpetuates its policy of racial discrimination and ethnic cleansing on a grand scale. Those are the headlines at the moment. For more content, check out our website, TeleSUR English. I'm Bio Martin. Thanks for watching.
John Bell, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner. The list of African American lives senselessly taken because of excessive policing is seemingly long and endless, underscoring the increasingly contentious relationship that exists between the black community and law enforcement. The tension between the African American community and police has reached a fever pitch this week.
We are better than this. Justice is not swift, revenge is. We are not focused on revenge. We are focused on trust, truth, and justice.
Hopes of a near future where the lives of young black men would be valued and lessons would be learned by all because of the names of those I just mentioned were dashed this past weekend in a place called Ferguson, Missouri. After this interview was filmed, another life was snuffed out. 18-year-old Michael Brown was more than just another name on a list of young black men gone too soon. He was an unarmed teenager who had just graduated from high school and was on his way to college.
That's my firstborn son. And everybody that know me knew how I felt about my son. I just wish I could have been there to help him. Anything. He didn't deserve that.
While Palestinians continue to fight for their right to live and thrive, African Americans in the United States are engaged in their own battle. The battle for the life of young black men and women. Today on The Global African, we'll discuss the role of police in the African American community with Reverend Lennox Yearwood, as this crucial question now more than ever looms large with community members and the police forces alike. I'm Bill Fletcher. Thanks for joining me on The Global African. Joining us now is Reverend Lennox Yearwood, a man who I've known for years, but I actually did not know was considered by Ebony magazine to be one of the, 100 most powerful African Americans. This is marvelous.
It's a nice thing.
It is. So Reverend Yearwood is the president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. He's a minister, community activist, and one of the most influential people in hip hop political life. As I mentioned, he was named in 2010 one of the 100 most powerful African Americans by Ebony magazine, and one of the 10 game changers in the Green Movement by Huffington Post. In 2008, Reverend Yearwood created the Hip Hop Caucus's Respect My Vote campaign with celebrity spokespeople, and which turned out record numbers of young people on Election Day. He was very active in the aftermath of the Hurricane Katrina disaster and became national director of the award-winning Gulf Coast Renewal Campaign, where he led a coalition of national and grassroots organizations to advocate for the rights of Katrina survivors. He is regularly on the media, and I'm really glad to have this opportunity to engage in this discussion.
I am glad to be here.
All right. So, Gaza. You watch the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
How does it make you feel?
It's troubling. It's troubling. Troubling for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's troubling, one, to see the human toll of innocence. It's also troubling to know that it seems like the public seems impotent in their ability to speak out against it. without being charged anti-Israel and just saying that there's a crime or problem going on. So it's hard. It's a hard, and it's also, you know, for many of us who are African American, you know, to not see the president speak out more against that, or speak out more forcefully, and to continue to sell weapons to Israel. It's a tough situation. What I am seeing is that particularly since President Obama has been in office, I think people were hoping for a much more peaceful society, and they're seeing the opposite. And I think that particularly after the Arab Spring, now leading into what's going on in Gaza, people just seem to be tired or not having the ability to speak up. And that's troubling. But there is still, I mean, and also the media is not showing that there are people around the globe who are speaking up. There were thousands who marched in Chicago. There were thousands who marched in London. There have been thousands around in many cities who have said that what's going on, and in both for folks who are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, around all sides, saying that what is happening. There was a march in Israel that took place. As a matter of fact, in Israel, they tried to stop the march. They said it wasn't safe because we were doing a ceasefire time. But what you're seeing, though, that I think you're seeing many people coming together who are speaking out, and that has been somewhat muted, but still not enough to see from many organizations, particularly progressive organizations. I'm shocked, actually, at the silence of the progressive community on this issue. And for me, in hip-hop, you know, I work with a lot of artists, and I saw a couple of artists who tweeted out, Rihanna tweeted out "Free Palestine," and got such a pushback that she had to say, you know, it was a mistake, it wasn't on purpose. But even the fact that she could even want to say that, it was just people were getting the pushback, understanding the power of culture as well.
Did people respond to that and support her?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there were thousands of retweets. I mean, she has now since deleted it from her account. But it was amazing because you see, and if artists want to get political, it's very hard sometimes for them to get political. And so after she did that, many people she got a lot of pushback. And we go, how could she do that? How can you not allow for Israel to have the right to defend themselves? Which is, I think, there is an important part to that argument as well. I mean, there is an important part for people to live together in peace. But it's also important to state the whole facts of the whole situation so people know what's going on, the history of what's going on with Palestine, and where it's, in essence, become, in some cases, the largest open-air prison in the world.
Now, you were in the Air Force?
I was an Air Force officer.
An officer?
I was an officer, that's indeed.
So what happened?
I mean, I think that, you know, like many, I used the program that you use to get money for education, which and let me say this, and I'm a person who am clearly not anti-American. I mean, I think that our job is to make this country to be the best country that it can be. I love my country then, I love my country now. I am an American. I'm also a person who came here, whose parents came here as an immigrant. My parents are both from Trinidad. I was the first person in my family to be born in this country. So that has a whole part of the process as well. And so, you know, being an officer, I understand the importance to have defense, if that's what is needed in some cases. But I also understood the importance of the power that this country has. And if used wrongly, it could have devastating impacts. And so as an officer, I began to speak out against the war in Iraq. This was in 2002. So if you don't want the best, sometimes career move, don't speak out against the war while you're in the Air Force. But at that time, President Bush administration and others decided to really make an example. And they began to even move forth to prosecute me. And have me imprisoned. And what was amazing about that is that during the time when I was waiting for that process to take place, I didn't stop speaking out. I said, well, I'm gonna speak out now. And there were some other amazing brothers and sisters who were also at the time, Damu Smith, who I was around, and others who were like just good brothers and sisters who can give counsel and just say, hey, you know, if you're doing the right thing, keep speaking out for justice. And so I did. I mean, long story short, I mean, it was very difficult. You know, it was hard. I was arrested protesting against the war, and was beaten. Matter of fact, I was on Capitol Hill and was beaten in Capitol Hill, in which my leg was broken because as officers came to Capitol Hill to speak out against the war. And I was the only African American, I guess I was easy to kind of point out in the crowd, and so that's what took place.
Let's talk about, use that as a segue to talk about violence at home. You're wearing a cap with the name Eric Garner.
Yep.
Tell us about Eric Garner.
Eric Garner now is dead. And he was murdered. He was a father, I believe, of 6 children in New York City. Eric Garner had just got finished breaking up a fight. And then the police officers came and in the process began to antagonize him. And they put on an illegal chokehold and literally choked him to death.
Why did they go after him if he had just broken up a fight?
A lot of times, and this is the thing that we are dealing with in our community, many African Americans are induced and are paralyzed by fear because of police brutality, because of the possibility of a public execution or assault, because you have, not all, but you do have some officers who become, in essence, thugs with badges.
That said, there's crime in our communities. Just a few months ago, a relative of mine was held up at gunpoint by another African American. She was walking with some friends. These 3 guys apparently were watching her, or watching them. They figured out the right place, and they held them up at gunpoint.
Yep.
Why should I care if a cop puts a bullet in that guy's head? It frequently feels that many progressives refuse to talk about crime, refuse to talk about it. We'll talk about police brutality, but we'll not talk about crime. Doesn't that lose us credibility?
No, it doesn't lose credibility. I think there's some layers to that process. One, there are different, if you talk about progressives, you know, I think you're right. There are many, there is silence sometimes from particularly white progressives. At times do become silent on the issues of police brutality.
Oh, I'm thinking about black progressives.
Well, I'm gonna get to that too.
Okay.
I'm gonna just start with the first layer. And as you have said, one of your great quotes is that, you know, race is the tripwire for the progressive movement. And so many times when we hit that tripwire, we fall over. And when I mean silent, I mean that they don't sometimes incorporate all of their energies, and the movement can be siloed. So when you go to the police brutality rally, it's not as, you know, blended and diverse as it should be. Going further, there is something, then you go to black progressives, or i.e. black civil rights organizations. There is something there where, unfortunately, in the 21st century, too many civil rights organizations have now moved from a spirit of solidarity to charity, where they then don't see the community in the same light, where they begin to see their brothers and sisters as a case and a cause, and not as their brother or their sister. And so they sometimes pull back, saying almost where they come out for these rallies saying that it was wrong when you see what happened to Eric Garner. It was wrong what happened to Trayvon Martin. It was wrong Oscar Grant or Sean Bell. But there's also something, you can hear it, there isn't the kind of, that there isn't something there where they are saying that there isn't total innocence. And so I think that there has been something that has happened with the civil rights movement that does not quietly align with the community as it should. And the community feels this. And I think that when you have a community that is so disenfranchised, so oppressed, so pushed down, and even their own brothers and sisters turn their back on them, not when it's so public as Eric Garner's death, who was choked to death on YouTube, but just across the board when you see the injustice around them, people just drive past that and keep moving, or leave the community completely to defend for themselves. I think that's where the problem comes in at. And I think that's where we have to fix that. And I think that you're right. So I think it's important for us and incumbent upon us to recognize that we cannot give up on our people, no matter what the situation may be. We must always recognize that it is a layered approach and that the policies have been put in place that have taken away jobs, opportunity, and education have now led to what you see today. Are just the symptoms of the true cancer of poverty and injustice in our communities.
You know, I've been active at different points around issues of police brutality. And what I have found in virtually every case is that the movement or effort could not be sustained. It was sort of what you were saying earlier. There'd be a demonstration, people would be really angry.
Yep.
In some cases, there would be suggestions of legislation. And at that point, it was almost like watching a balloon deflate. The energy just seems to leave us. And then that's it, until the next brother or sister gets killed. What's your analysis? What do you think is at the root of this sort of deflation? And what do we need to do differently?
That's very hard to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to see so many mothers and fathers who you know are sometimes being used twice. They have been victimized, they've lost their child. And then later on, organizations come in, put them up, stand next to them. And then as soon as the camera leaves, they leave as well. And unfortunately, from labor, civil rights, progressive, we're not seeing the long-term strategy that needs to be put in place so that, yes, there might be brutalities now in 2014, but if we put things in place by 2020, you will see a decrease because the policies will be in place and we will do the things that need to be done to change that process.
Are there any parallels with the anti-lynching campaigns of the 20th century? Began in the early 20th century, the whole idea of passing federal legislation to address lynching. I mean, is that sort of along the lines of what you're describing?
Most definitely. I mean, I think there's a disconnect. I think that this is where we have to empower, at the very least, our Congressional Black Caucus and our Progressive Caucus members.
Mm-hmm.
I think you started there on the federal side. I think that, you know, President Obama has said repeatedly, if we like it or don't like it, he has said, make me do it. This has been his approach to policy. So I think we should make him do certain things. I think that's how he has said that. And I think we've seen that from My Brother's Keeper and other elements, things that have come out, that he can't be made to do things once the political pressure is put upon. I definitely think that we should look at the local levels, our black mayors and our black and governors and black governors, and local and state officials to also be a part of the solution on that aspect. And then I think that for me, which in the 21st century, we have much more expertise than they had in the 20th century. So we should definitely empower our think tanks our academies, our institutions, our HBCUs.
So then what do we say? I mean, when you have a black political leadership that should know better, and most of them probably also live in a certain level of fear of what could happen to them if they get stopped, what is stopping them from taking action? Why are they not as responsive as they should be?
Courage. Courage. They are a fear of being considered and called radical. That's the easy answer. I mean, there's clearly it's much more than just that. But a lot of them, what I have seen, even on the federal level and on the local level, particularly like in areas like Prince George's County, where it should be a no-brainer. You have everything in your place to make this a place. And I think that they lack the courage. And I think, on the other hand, we are not holding we are putting people in positions of power, sometimes just based upon their skin color or the color of their hue, who do not have the true interests of the people. And they talk the talk and look the part, but clearly also have learned how to play two sides of the coin. And so when they go out to some community, they talk and rap like they are from the streets. And once they get to the suites, there's a different dialogue in that aspect. And so I think that, I'm hopeful that my generation is much more in tune to putting in new leadership in that aspect that can deal with those who really have their political interests in hand. And
Do you see evidence of it?
I think there needs to be I think this is where political education takes place. This is where, groups like Hip Hop Caucus have to do their job and their due diligence to educate. I think this is when we have to even look beyond the traditional kind of political parties and partisanship that people have just kind of taken, where we can no longer just say it's about Democrat or Republican, but it has to be about humanity, about fighting for our community. I think we need to hold those accountable who get into office, and we need to, when they do what's wrong, they need to be punished politically so they can be removed quickly. They can't just come around the next term, have done nothing for the community, and then remain. Come to somebody's church or mosque or somebody's community day event and just dance around, and then we re-elect them. I think we need to hold them accountable. I think also this is where the institutions have to do a better job. I think that, the problem also here is this. Too many leaders are kind of in cahoots together. And so you have leadership, in which they kind of, and I've seen this, and you've seen it too as well, kind of the toothpick, cheese on stick circuit, so to speak, in which they come together and all network in their own little world, and they kind of support one another to the end. And then they kind of will put the resources behind them, even though we know they're not doing what they need to be doing for their own community, and are voting against the interests of the people in their community.
Let me go full circle.
Yep.
What about the violence within our respective communities, within the African American community, within the Latino communities? People often don't seem as outraged.
It grieves me. You know something, Bill? It grieves me now that I am a black leader. I'm around other black leaders and we have this conversation. It grieves me how quick we don't hurt and cry anymore for those of us who are laying in their blood in the streets. It grieves me when something special has to be about a young child before we even care, which is similar to what's going on in Gaza or what's going on down at the border. Something is happening where there are certain communities, certain people are being regulated in this country to second-class citizenship. And I think that we as a people, we need to step up and say, no, everybody who died in Chicago is a life. Everybody who died in Baltimore or in DC, we need to take a different approach and be as concerned if it was a gangbanger or if it was the valedictorian. and speak up more about that. But we're not doing that for a number of reasons. But we're not doing that.
Reverend Yearwood, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
For this discussion, this much needed, very timely, very emotional discussion. And I'm hoping that it's replicated around the country.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you, brother.
Okay. And thank you very much for joining us on this episode of The Global African. I'm your host, Bill Fletcher.
En un mundo en constante movimiento, todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos y es necesario conocerlos. Nos preguntamos, ¿qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento? ¿Cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan? Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturday, only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English, a critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The world today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
The President of Peru, Pedro Castillo, offered a message before the plenary of the Congress addressed to the nation after the approval of the new process of impeachment against him promoted by sectors of the right wing. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Wednesday that despite negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are not the smoothest, the parties are hopeful that a consensus can be achieved. The Arab League denounced Israeli escalation of violence and urged the United Nations to intervene in the conflict in the occupied territories in Palestine. Hi, this is From the South. I'm your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. On Tuesday, the President of Peru, Pedro Castillo, offered a message before the plenary of the Congress addressed to the nation after the approval of the new process of impeachment against him promoted by sectors of the right wing. The head of state requested to make use of his constitutional right to address the nation in order to present the achievements made by the executive in his more than 7 months in office. Castillo offered a balance of the progress made by his government in the fight against COVID-19. He also detailed that since the beginning of his station, his objective has been to face the most urgent problems in order to improve the living conditions of the Peruvian people.
Likewise, thank you very much. I express my solidarity to the families of the people of Fatals, and I say that we are working for you. So, making use of the right from the Article 118 from the Constitution, as President of the National People of Peruvian, I present myself in front of you to talk to all the citizens in the nation. I come here to the National Congress because we are convinced that we need to give clear signs to the population, including the President of the Republic and the authorities. We are obliged to present balance.
The Chilean Constitutional Convention approved with 108 votes in favor the right to abortion for all women and persons able to conceive. Now, the decision provides for the guarantees and conditions for a pregnancy, a voluntary interruption of pregnancy, childbirth, and maternity in the Chilean Constitution. The text passed with the needed two-thirds vote majority, only 39 against and 6 abstentions. The final version of the new Magna Carta will be submitted to a popular referendum this year. Costa Rica and the United States signed on Tuesday a letter of understanding to promote activities and cooperation in the field of migration policy with the aim of strengthening the Central American countries' capacities in such respect. According to official information, the document signed intends to strengthen the work of professional migration police and the border police of Costa Rica with the aim of consolidating the fight against the growing human trafficking and programs for migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. The meeting was attended by the Secretary of the United States Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, and the Minister of Public Security, Governance, and Police of Costa Rica, Michael Soto, who reviewed the problems affecting the Central American region and the continent in general.
Well, these meetings are always very important when trying to reach agreements and understandings on some of the problems that affect the region, the Central American region, the American region in general, on problems such as drug trafficking, the flow of migrants, and to assess what has been done so far and what the projections for the future are.
We continue with the latest in Latin America as in Ecuador, President Guillermo Lasso partially vetoed the law regulating abortion for rape. The president included, according to his own statement, observations to the draft law that are in accordance with the Constitutional Court's ruling. He assures that there are provisions in the law that have not been complied with by the legislature or contravene the Ecuadorian legal framework. In the same way, he warned that the veto includes 61 alternative texts and the Assembly will have 30 days to decide whether to maintain the original document or accept the new proposal of the executive. The bill on abortion for rape has divided Ecuadorian citizens between those who consider it a form of justice for the victims of these crimes and those who believe that nothing justifies the interruption of pregnancy. In Peru, a landslide in the province of Pataz in the department of La Libertad left at least 7 people missing while dozens of homes were buried. The Pataz Regional Councilor Luis Rodriguez reported preliminarily that there were at least 15 houses underground. Then the regional governor Manuel Lempen said that the event covered approximately between 60 and 80 houses. Authorities called an emergency meeting to coordinate search and rescue actions and to detail the magnitude of damage after the landslide. Concerning more disasters in Peru, fishermen's and merchants' unions of areas affected by the oil spill that took place 2 months ago in a Repsol installation in front of the Sea of Ventanilla rejected the compensation bonus that the company would grant to the victims. The fishermen are demanding the establishment of a dialogue table to reject the bonus of 3,000 soles, an equivalent to $802 that the Spanish company wants to grant the victims with the approval of Pedro Castillo's government given on March 4th. The unions claim that their participation in the negotiations was minimal and that the impact was not equivalent in each of the fishing areas, so the compensation cannot be unique or homogeneous. According to the agency, Repsol reported the leakage of 0.16 barrels of oil in an area of 2.5 square meters. The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, gave an official statement on the progress of the vaccination campaign against COVID-19. He called on the population to receive the booster dose.
Vaccination of the people who were adults. We advanced in the children vaccination in the 60%, and we cannot let the guard down. One of the key elements of this stage, in this moment that we are of high control of coronavirus, is the vaccination. This is one of the key, is that to have the booster job. And I made a call to all the Venezuelan people, to the population. If you haven't got the booster vaccine, you go and you get the vaccine. This is a family matter. The grandmother, the grandfather, the mother, the father, the children, the young people. We have to motivate this. Let's go to get the booster shot. In Venezuela is the first country in the world that we have scientifically decided to get the booster jab 4 months after the main vaccine, the first one.
We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English, a critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
Hi and welcome back to From the South. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Wednesday that despite negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are not the smoothest, the parties are hopeful that a consensus can be achieved. Lavrov made the statement during an interview with a Russian media outlet. He also described the current situation as historic, saying that this is a battle which will result into a new world order. Russia's top diplomat said that his assessment on the ongoing dialogue between Moscow and Kiev is based on considerations made by Russian negotiators. Regarding the work of the bilateral teams, Lavrov urged negotiators to work in a more relaxed atmosphere without prompting situations of hysteria and unnecessary tensions. The Russian government commissioned its Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin a list of economic measures to counteract the sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. The project includes over 100 initiatives which will call for a budget close to $9 billion. According to the Russian premier, the plan includes a series of priority measures which will allow for flexibility and a constant update to be implemented on different stages. Mishustin said the measures are focused on supporting small and medium-sized companies, whereas for companies in strategic sectors, a special credit program has been set up to allow them to replenish their operating capital to continue working without interruptions. The Prime Minister said Moscow is planning on introducing to its partners at the Eurasian Economic Union a proposal to increase the limit for duty-free imports. Now, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, said on a video-recorded message that negotiations between Kiev and Moscow will continue today. With this announcement, President Zelensky confirmed preliminary versions offered by his advisor, Mikhail Podolyak, who had already reported on a new meeting scheduled for this Wednesday. Zelensky reiterated that although the parties exhibit fundamental contradictions, his compromise is within reach, although he has described the negotiating process as complex and hard. Meanwhile, Moscow confirmed that what Kiev reported about Moscow submitting a letter detailing their conditions, awaiting for a response. In a recap, Russia acknowledged the independence and sovereignty of Donetsk and Luhansk and signed treaties of friendship, cooperation and mutual assistance with both territories. And based on such agreements, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a special military operation last February 24th to protect the population in the Donbass region. The Unione Sindacale di Base, one of the largest trade unions in Italy, has called for several protests against alleged humanitarian flights departing from Italian civilian airports to Ukraine carrying weapons. The union members of the Galileo Galilei airport in the city of Pisa refused to load one of the humanitarian Ukraine-bound flights because they said it was carrying neither medicine nor food nor clothing, but weapons, ammunition, and explosives. They rejected and strongly denounced the absolute fake of the aid, which they say is used as a cover for war. A big demonstration is called for the Saturday, March 19th, in support of the people of Donbass and Russia under the slogan "Bridges to Peace, not flights of war." Russia announced its decision to leave the Council of Europe while accusing NATO and the European Union of manipulating that regional body against Moscow. The Russian Foreign Ministry confirmed on Tuesday that it had initiated the procedure to leave the Council of Europe, believing that it is a space used by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to pursue its geopolitical aims. The Russian Foreign Ministry expressed its decision in a letter from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, delivered this Tuesday to the organization. The Russian Foreign Ministry makes it clear in the document that the withdrawal from this space will not harm the rights and freedoms of the Russian citizens, and such a decision is in response to the unprecedented policies and sanctions in Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin noted on Wednesday that Ukraine is not showing seriousness in seeking solutions to the current situation that would be acceptable to both sides. In a telephone conversation with the head of the European Council, Charles Michel, the Russian leader presented his views on the progress of negotiations between Moscow and Kiev with the aim of working out agreements that would take into account Russia's demands. Among Moscow's conditions to Kiev, Putin underlined the necessity of recognition of the reunification of Crimea to Russia by the Ukrainian authorities and the establishment of guarantees of military neutrality of that state. He also restated that Moscow cannot allow Kiev to acquire nuclear weapons and further militarize itself, which is a danger to the country's security. Putin stressed that the continued expansion of NATO to the east is unacceptable for Russia. United States President Joe Biden will travel to Brussels, Belgium on March 24th to meet with the leaders of the NATO alliance and the European Commission to discuss the Ukraine-Russia conflict. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Biden will discuss the ongoing deterrence and defense efforts during the NATO summit and reaffirm the U.S. commitment to its NATO allies. The United States Chief of Staff will also discuss further sanctions on Russia and hopes to seize the occasion to enhance Western unity on behalf of Ukraine. However, Ukraine's top list petitions like establishing a no-fly zone or providing fighter jets seem to be out of reach. The trip falls in line with Biden's top aides visits, including Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. This announcement comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated his country will not join NATO. Let's shift our focus now to Spain. Catalan teachers held protests in Barcelona's streets and main cities of Catalonia in rejection to recent educational policies made by the Generalitat and the education authorities there. 6 days of protests are scheduled to take place in the country until the end of March. Protests began after the president of the Generalitat, Pere Aragonés, and the Minister of Education, Josep González Cambrai, announced on February 10th the early beginning of the 2022-2023 school year and the reduction of school timetable for kindergarten and elementary levels. Protesters demand the resignation of González Cambrai for not consulting teachers to carry out educational changes, including modifications to the curriculum for the new school year. They also claim better salaries while denouncing the lack of sanitary conditions to return to schools. Tensions arise on the Korean peninsula as U.S. military activity in the area increases in response to an alleged missile launch. The USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier began military drills in the Yellow Sea, and other U.S. forces stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea stepped up military drills amid signs of alleged imminent North Korean tests using its long-range missile system. Mobilization of U.S. warships responds to speculation that North Korea may test its largest intercontinental ballistic missile. Pyongyang said the releases were conducted as preparations for a satellite launch. We have more news coming up after a final short break. Please stay with us.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR. We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean.
Hi and welcome back. The Arab League denounced Wednesday the Israeli escalation in the occupied Palestinian territories and called on the United Nations Security Council to stop Tel Aviv's crimes against the Palestinian people. The League meeting in Cairo said that at least 20 Palestinian citizens of different ages and sexes have been executed by Tel Aviv's occupying army this year. They condemned the demolition of Palestinian homes in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the displacement of people, and the mass arrests of innocent civilians without due process. This league claims that the state terrorism practiced by Israel against the Palestinians perpetuates its policy of racial discrimination and ethnic cleansing on a grand scale. In the occupied territories in Palestine, Israeli troops killed 3 young Palestinians during different police operations. The first victim, 16-year-old Nadar Hadam Rayan, died in an arrest raid outside the northern city of Nablus. The second, Allah Shaham, in his 20s, was killed in Kalambi, also as part of a police operation. In the same context, Sanad Salem Al-Kharbad, 27-year-old and father of 3 children, was shot dead by a police unit during an arrest activity in the city of Rahat. Authorities said the number of dead Palestinians killed by Israeli forces reaches 20 only this year. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, on Tuesday to denounce the October military coup that plunged the country into further turmoil. Security forces fired tear gas canisters toward the anti-coup protesters as well as spraying dyed water. Tuesday's rally was the latest in a series of protests over the military takeover that removed the civilian-led transitional government. The takeover upended Sudan's short-lived transition to democratic rule. Pro-democracy protesters are calling for the establishment of a fully civilian government to complete the now stalled democratic transition. The generals, however, insist that they will hand over power only to an elected government. Elections are set to take place this year.
We are here today as the No to Women's Oppressions Initiative in solidarity with the resistance committees and we are here today as the No to Women's Oppressions Initiative in solidarity with the resistance committees and to reject the military oppression and the rapes. We reject the military rule and the people behind the coup will surely fall. We will never be oppressed by the rapes or the detentions.
Somalia failed to complete elections for the lower house of parliament by Tuesday, March 15th, which was the deadline set for appointing candidates. This is another delay in the electoral process that should lead to the appointment of a new president, which has been expected for more than a year now. The Somali government, which last month extended the deadline for completing the appointment of members of the lower house, had made no new announcement by Tuesday evening. The federal states of Southwest and Galmudug concluded the election of their representatives, but 40 out of the 275 seats in the lower house remain to be filled in 3 states, Jubaland, Irshabelle, and Puntland. The closure of the lower house elections is a crucial step towards the election of a new president. And the Pritzker Prize, architecture's most prestigious award, was given Tuesday to Burkina Faso-born architect Diabedo Francis Kere, the first African to win the honor in its more than 40 years of history. Kere, 56 years old, was hailed for his quote-unquote pioneering designs that are sustainable to the earth and its inhabitants in lands of extreme scarcity, as in a statement Tom Pritzker said, the chairman of the Hyatt Foundation that sponsors the award. Kere, a dual citizen of Burkina Faso and Germany, is the 51st recipient of the illustrious prize since it was first awarded in 1979. He is renowned for building schools, health facilities, housing, civic buildings, and public spaces across Africa.
I am speechless. I have a feeling of overwhelming honor, but also a sense of responsibility. I simply feel honored. That is unexpected. It was never in my dream. Even my dream full of fantasy, I never thought that this work that I was doing, as a duty to my people that has paved my career would ever be connected to the Pritzker Foundation. So I feel I am the happiest man on the planet.
We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also join us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Martin. Thanks for watching.
Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police state. I can't breathe, that's why I take a knee. Won't take you for slavery. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united, we'll prevail. Oh, say, can you see Rome is over? Oh, build the new, oh, the new, oh, build the new, oh, build the new, oh, build the new, oh, build the new.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays on TeleSUR.
Welcome to your trench for the defense of Mother Earth Green Zone. I am Freddy Morales, and from the summit near the city of La Paz, I invite you to join us during this half an hour, loaded with the best environmental information.
Mother Nature has immense power. Just as she gave us wonderful landscape worthy of total admiration, she also claimed spaces, many of them invited by humanity and invention. All phenomena that require great reflection, since without it, creation would not be possible.
Remember that we have at your disposal our social networks for you to send us your comments. On Twitter as @ZonaVerdeTeleSUR, on the Facebook page Zona Verde TeleSUR, and our email is zonaverde@telesurtv.net. Let us immediately see the most outstanding news of the week.
According According to a study by the Global Carbon Project, an international climate research consortium released on November 40, greenhouse gas emissions are back to pre-pandemic COVID-19 levels and in some sectors could break records again. The report notes that despite confinements due to the COVID-19 pandemic that slowed the global economy and with the pollution of the planet due to fossil energy consumption, they fell by a total of 5.4% during 2020. However, with the growing recovery of economic activities, are expected to rise to 4.9% by 2021, just 1% shy of 1920 records emissions. The study also revealed that gas and coal emissions are a particular concern as they will grow this year more than they fell in 2020. And with respect to oil, its emissions will increase by up to 4.4% in 2021. Although the authors of the report indicate that in this sector emissions could accelerate since transportation has not yet recovered the levels of activity prior to the health crisis. Following the climate changes generated around the planet, there has been alterations in the distribution patterns of glaciers. In the case of Bolivia, the Andean country has lost about half of its glaciers in the last 50 years. And according to recent projections, Andean temperatures could increase between 2 and 5 degrees Celsius before the end of the 21st century. Therefore, it's estimated by 2050, warming will cause the loss of 95% of Bolivia's internal ice.
All the glaciers that are similar to Chacaltaya along the Rio Cordillera, which is part of the Andes, are suffering the same process of melting and death, and probably in the course of the next 30 years, all these glaciers will disappear. Today it is a cemetery because here we no longer see skiers. There is no snow, no glaciers, nothing but pure stone.
One of the most sensitive losses in this country has been in the Chacaltaya mountain, where the highest ski slope in the world disappeared due to thousands of years of accumulated ice. This adds to the long list of natural and patrimonial losses due to changes in climate patterns. Although Bolivia ranks 80th in the greenhouse gas emissions, this year the Andean country presented an initiative to the United Nations so that the countries with the highest emission increase between 5 and 10 times the financing to the most affected nations and raise their emissions reduction goals.
Now, we will show you some actions to adapt to climate change.
Some actions to adapt to climate change. Build safer infrastructures that are capable of withstanding floods or sudden changes in temperature. The protection or recovery of natural areas through reforestation of forests. Promote diverse crops to guarantee productions if any of the crops of items are threatened. Research of the evolution of temperature and rainfall in your locality, and thus prepare for typical events.
The COP26 held in Scotland ended and addressed different aspects of climate change. In this regard, we will see how in recent years these changes in climate have been expressed as a series of extreme meteorological phenomena. Also, the frequency of hurricanes, floods and storms is visible and notorious for the material and human damages they cause. In the following note, we will evaluate the seriousness that this type of phenomena can represent for mankind and ecosystems. Let's see it.
In its most recent report published by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change Experts, one of its conclusions revealed that although some regions of the world are more susceptible than others to the effects of global warming, all will be affected in some way by its effects.
It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change and making extreme weather events more frequent and severe. Second, it shows that climate change is affecting every region on our planet. And lastly, it explains that strong, rapid, sustained reductions in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions would be required to limit global warming.
The consequences of the report's recent projections translate into a growing climate instability that will be unprecedented if the world's government do not take urgent and drastic measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In this scenario, scientists warn that global warming could reach a point of no return, where climate catastrophe will be the new normal.
Unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, we will be unable to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and the consequences will be catastrophic.
If we continue putting emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, not only will this become the new normal, per se, it'll become a much more likely normal than it even is today.
Among the most affected regions of the world are the whole South due to their geographic conditions, high rate of solar radiation throughout the year, and low rainfall. These conditions make them more vulnerable to the effects of extreme heat waves.
A flood causes a few deaths, maybe a few dozen. Here we talk about thousands of deaths every time there is a big extreme heat wave, and we know that these heat waves multiply.
To understand the magnitude of the changes we are experiencing, it's enough to visit the hottest place in the world, the Valley of Death, which year after year records high temperatures.
Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth, has gotten much warmer in the last 20 years than it was.
In the Death Valley, the record of 45.4 degrees Celsius is the record temperature measured by modern instruments. However, experts believe that other sites with less access in this desert could be even hotter. This is more serious for the most inhabited desert regions, such as those located in India or Iraq. Heat waves have become a daily drama.
We are very much affected by heat, and we poor people are the most affected.
We are very tired. It is impossible to be in the sun. It is very hard. We are exhausted. The other day, I fell to the ground in the middle of the street.
The life of the inhabitants of the countries located in the Arabian Peninsula is become more and more difficult, both in urban region and in the desert.
The weather here in UAE is every day different. Sometimes it gets 45, sometimes it gets 49, sometimes it goes above 52. So we have to work no matter what temperature it gets every day, because when we come out of our rooms, we prepare ourselves, our body, our mind, that we have to work in the heat. So we have no other choice except working in the heat.
Although some nomadic desert tribes have learned over the millennia to cope with and adapt to the increase in heat, there might come a point where the rate of life is threatened.
I think it must be no less than 43 degrees Celsius now, and it is only 8:30 or 9 a.m. So by 2 in the afternoon, the temperature could reach 48 or 49 degrees Celsius, and sometimes 50. But we get used to it. For us it is normal. We are not surprised nor worried.
Despite the confidence of the very inhabitant of the all-new Al-Kavir Desert in Saudi Arabia, who for generations have raised camels under the harsh sun, some experts indicate